Okay, so hello, Dr. Cadle students. Dr. Cadle, who I know as Lanette, has asked me to do what Stephanie Vi just did, which is to give a basic overview of how I use games in the composition classroom. Yesterday, Stephanie and I and some other presenters did an 8-hour workshop on this, and if you're interested in this, as Stephanie said, come to the C's and participate in the workshop. So I have an article on computers and composition out a few years ago, actually a lot of years ago now, and I sort of say that computer games aren't really the best things to use to teach writing explicitly. Most computer games, ever since the 80s and the Zork interfaces, don't really privilege writing as a means of interacting with the game or even other people. Some of them privilege reading, but a lot of them are going to voice acting, and even the MMOs, most people who are doing complex communication, things like raiding and dungeons, well, not dungeons, but raiding and things, will use voice over internet technologies rather than typing, and because of whatever. That being said, games are especially relevant in the composition classroom because they provide fodder for students to write about. A lot of what we do in a composition classroom is we teach, and I sort of say this in the article, is that when we teach composition, we have to be cognizant that what we're not teaching is much more than writing. We're teaching students how to compose themselves as university students. We're teaching students how to compose themselves. Lindsay Bloom has a great article, Composition is a Middle-Class Enterprise, and so we're teaching students basically just very specific modes of subjectivity with value judgments, and a lot of games also teach students these things, and so you can use games as part of your composition classroom to sort of have students think about the larger ways that they're being asked to construct themselves or compose themselves as subjects via technologies, via media, and things like that. The way I specifically use games in the classroom is I use and do a number of things. I use a lot of low-tech games. I stole a game called 1001 Cards from Stephanie Vi, which basically you divide the students into groups and you give them a bunch of piles of blank cards, and you ask them to, give them 20 minutes to create a game about that, and then to write in the instructions, and then do that, and then to have the other groups play the games, and then you can actually talk about revision as a result of, okay, this worked or this didn't work. You can talk about invention and brainstorming and all of the things. The first day of class, I used Legos as an icebreaker. I divide them into groups, pour the Legos on the table, and then ask them I divide them into pairs, so I pour the Legos on the table and ask them to introduce each other using the Legos, and only let them use 21 pieces or some other random number depending on how cruel I'm feeling. And they do that, and then I sort of talk them through that, and I say, how is this exercise like writing? And I talk about what it means to actually have to create meaning from specific blocks according to a grammar, how the Lego pieces I have are very heavily gendered male. They're Star Wars, Indiana Jones things. So I thought, what does it mean if you're a woman, and is language itself gendered? Are there certain things? And then I talk about how they work around these constraints or work around the rules, because of course somebody's going to cheat. So I talk about cheating and what that means for writing, and how writing is always this model of following the rules, but also a model of recognizing the rules and what the rules are trying to do and what the messages are, and working against it. There's that subjectivity thing. Games, I found that a lot of students are very interested in games, and even those who claim they're not interested in games do play games on a regular basis, like Facebook games, or Farmville, or Snake, or Candy Crush on the phone, or Flappy Bird, or any of these kind of things. And so the article I wrote about in the syllabus journal is actually about a topics class on gaming. As an English professor, I'm a rhetoric professor, but I'm kind of concerned about Kathleen Hales has a good article that I can't remember at the moment. I'm a forgetful English professor, basically, but she argues that, it's not enough for the English discipline to just focus on novels and just to focus on textual sort of production, which is digital production now. Novels are digital production. Everything that's written it hits the digital in some way or another. So I'm really interested in giving students these interpretive tools to say, okay, how does a game make meaning? It's not just through narrative. In English studies, we've had this really reactionary, I think, swing back to narrative studies. It's almost back to structuralism. But it's also talked about space in games, and also characters and conflict, and also elements like video, moving images, models. In games, I joke you drive past the same tree 20 times, just like you did in Westerns, because of the way the game engines work and loops and stuff like that. So, Lanette's, Dr. Cadle's telling me that I'm running out of my over 5 minutes. I always go too long. So anyways, again, I would say if you're interested in gaming and studying gaming, especially teaching with gaming, you can go to conferences like the 4 Cs. Regularly, a bunch of game conferences, scholars get together at Southwest ACA PCA conference in Albuquerque, New Mexico, which also has palm trees and kind of nice weather. And we talk about the more ideological sort of theory aspects of game, which also I think has a bearing on composition. Thank you for the opportunity, and I'm going to press the button.
Yeah, press the button.
And
Look for it.